I'm going to move on here and get our next speakers up here. Grace Lewis is a mother of 4. She's a registered nurse from Mount Vernon, Arkansas. She started researching Common Core this year after concerns regarding her son's math schoolwork. And she and Patrick Richardson, who is also a speaker here today, created Arkansas Against Common Core website. Her topic is, what is Common Core and why should I care? And in addition, Betty Yerger has a master's degree in elementary education and secondary art education. She taught for 34 years, well seasoned, K through college in 4 different states. She holds an Arkansas Lifetime Teacher Certificate. She has taught in parochial, private, and public schools and was High School Teacher of the Year 1995 through 96 at West Carroll Parish. She taught regular classroom for 16 years and art education for 18 years. She studied watercolor painting in Scotland. She recently retired from teaching public school in 2012. Her topic is science and history standards, and they are going to come up and do their presentation for you. Feel free to get refreshments, and the bathroom is that way if you need it.
Like Debbie said, I started researching Common Core this year after my son's math homework. I noticed there were lots of different ways that they were teaching it. He was coming home, he was crying, upset about the homework and everything. And so I started to research more into Common Core, and what I found, I was outraged, basically. I started calling legislators on the education committees and wanted to know, what are we doing about this? Other states, have legislation going on to stop this. What can we do? And we just recently had an informational hearing for our legislators on the Education Committee about Common Core. All right, so what is Common Core and why should I care? As we all know, that Common Core is basically supposed to be standards that are uniform across the United States. They say one of the things that is going to help is to get our kids prepared for college. What they don't tell you, though, is that the college they have in mind is your community college. It's a 2-year community college, not a university level, because of some of the ways they're teaching math. They also say that it's going to help our kids move state to state. According to the Bureau of Statistics, that's less than 2% of children that actually move state to state during the school year. So I don't think changing standards across the United States for 2% is really worth it. I'm going to go straight into the math, because that's what I had the issue with. I call it fuzzy math. They don't want our children to memorize their multiplication facts. Here are some examples. A standard algorithm is going to, you're going to have the numbers stacked on each other, like 26 times 31, then you're going to do the math underneath. Well, one of the ways they're teaching it is for the child to think deeply, to go more deeper into the concept. So we know 10 times 31 is 310, 20 times 31 is 620, plus the 155 equals 775, and I know 5 times 31 would be 155, and then 1 times 30. It would take my son, when he would do his math homework, 8 minutes to do a problem that when I did it with him would take him a minute. I don't feel like that's efficient, effective, and really going to teach our children to critically think like they say it is. Here's the lattice method. I'm not even going to really go into that, but he was in 1st grade, so this is the kind of stuff that we saw. Right here you'd have the triangle. So so-and-so's class set a goal to collect 50 cans by Friday. By Tuesday, the class had collected 27 cans. How many more cans do they need to reach the class goal? That's an easy math question. It shouldn't take doing all of this. Well, he would start crying, and, well, Mom, do I have the parts or do I have the whole? Because you have to put the whole at the top, the parts at the bottom. Or they could use this other method. Well, you can add, take away 10 and then take away, so forth. Like I said, it was not efficient, it was not quick, and it was not the most effective way of doing it. Same thing over here, 28 plus 29. That's not that hard to do, but they want you to do it a specific way. So if your child starts stacking the numbers like he did, it's wrong. You have to do it the way that they wanted it done in the classroom. This is Dr. James Milgram. He was on the validation committee to approve these standards. He is a professor at Stanford University and he consults with NASA. He says the reason I didn't sign off on them is that they did not match up to international expectations. They were at least 2 years behind the practices in the high-achieving countries by the 7th grade and only require a partial understanding of what would be the content of a normal solid course in Algebra 1 and Geometry. Moreover, they cover very little of the content of Algebra 2 and none of any higher level course. They will not help our children to match up to the students in top foreign countries. I emailed Dr. Milgram when I found out about us having, setting up, and I'm organized who is all going to speak, and he did speak at our hearing. He did a really good job. But to give you a little bit more information as to what they are taking out, there was an article that just came out yesterday, and it really addressed it really well. It says, my study comparing the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Principles and Standards published in 2000, the previous standards. The study confirms that Common Core national standards will set our children back 1 to 2 years. The math standards specifically are markedly inferior to all 3 sets of standards used for comparison. So they're comparing to the Georgia standards. It says, so what are they missing? Probability, it's gone in elementary grades. Mean, median, mode, and range, gone in elementary grades. The concept of pi, including area and circumference of circles, gone in elementary grades. Division of a fraction by a fraction, gone in elementary grades. The fundamental theorem of arithmetic, prime factorization, gone completely. Using fractions, decimals, and percentages interchangeably. So you know that 3/4 is 0.75. That's gone completely. Measurement including density, velocity, and scientific notation. And what they're saying is they want to go deeper into a smaller amount of subjects. But who is the one that gets to decide what things get left out? So yeah, there are some standards that are better than our previous Arkansas standards, but a lot of things are being left out too. Algebra, inadequate readiness in elementary grades. Geometry, inadequate readiness in elementary and middle grades. They go on to say, in addition, Common Core ignores advice from highly successful Asian nations to teach area and perimeter in the same grade level. The previous GPS taught these concepts together. Common Core does not. But Common Core proponents will argue that the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics supports Common Core. So the standards must be good. Unfortunately, that is not necessarily so. The council has been hijacked by political operators who are less interested in true mathematics education than in cultivating the good graces of the powerful entities behind Common Core, and perhaps reaping the rewards of doing business with these groups and marketing Common Core materials. Having taught elementary math for 9 years, I know students are capable of so much more than what Common Core requires. When our previous standards actually challenge students, why are we settling for the mediocrity of Common Core? So now we're going to go into Dr. Sandra Stofsky. She's from...
Was that an article from Dr. Milgram that you...
No, that was not. No. Okay. I can send the article to you if you want it.
That'd be great.
Okay. Dr. Sandra Stofsky is from University of Arkansas. She was also on the validation committee. And back to Dr. Milgram, he was the only actual mathematician on the validation committee, just so you know. Dr. Sandra Stofsky was on for the ELA standards to sign off on those. And she said the reason that she didn't sign off on them, let's see, because they were so inadequate that she described them as empty skill sets that won't prepare students for authentic college coursework. She predicts that graduating seniors will have a reading level of 7th grade. The most serious problem with Common Core's ELA standards is the drastic de-emphasis on literature. Common Core emphasizes informational text to the detriment of creative literature. This is David Coleman, and he was the chief ELA architect that wrote the standards. And this is the reason that he put more emphasis on literature, is what he stated. He says, as you grow up in this world, you realize that people don't really give a beat about what you feel or what you think. It is rare in a working environment that someone says, Johnson, I need a market analysis by Friday, but before that, I need a compelling account of your childhood. he's mocking literature. He's basically saying, we don't need literature, it's not going to get you anywhere in the world. But what literature does for children is help them to critically think for themselves, to delve into these concepts all by themselves and come to conclusions on their own, not be informed by an informational text on how to think. I'm going to let Betty real quickly just kind of tell you about the science and history standards from the research that she has done.
In researching the science and the history standards, I don't want to hit any buttons up here and do something wrong. One of the things that really caught my attention right away was from the book, A Framework for the K-12 Science Education. And I took selected topics out of that. Most of the science subjects in this textbook were hard science. Solar system, electricity, you know, hard science. But mixed in the middle were a couple of chapters. And this is what I really focused on. I hit something there and did something.
That's okay.
The human impacts on Earth systems. In other words, how do humans change the planet? This section of the book presents a lot of negatives about people and how the Earth is damaged by the people living on the Earth. According to the passage, people destroy natural habitats and ruin the environments. This section also promotes sustainability, alternate energy sources, and is very, very anti-fossil fuel. I don't know if y'all agree with this far left liberal philosophy, but they are mixing this into hard science facts. How are children going to know the difference? Another chapter that caught my attention, and I'm giving you a synopsis of what happened here. My paper has the actual page numbers. You can read it, the whole thing for yourself. The global climate change. In this section, the book is discussing how science models and computers predict climate change. It presents a doomsday view of people moving off of the coastal areas because of global warming, which will cause the poles to melt and the seas to rise. This book states emphatically that human activities play a major role in climate change. One volcano eruption wipes out all of our savings here in America for the carbon. One volcano. We will experience worse storms and ocean warming. The passage proposes to restrict atmospheric carbon and restrict the use of fossil fuels. So I want you to think about that particular aspect of what our children are going to be learning in science. It's not really anything more than indoctrination and brainwashing. That's my opinion. Also, I took a look at the study of history, and what Dr. Endicott was talking about is absolutely on the money. I found an excellent review by a guy named Craig Thurtell, who was a former teacher in New York State. He is very learned in the histories. He's a very, very good expert on history and on social studies. And you can go on the George Mason University History website and find out a little bit more information about this. According to Thurtell, the history standards state what a student must do, but not how to do it. He goes on to say that sourcing is absent except by inference and there is not very much contextualization. You have to have a lot of concrete knowledge before you can just assume things. He feels that there is way too much focus on job training rather than education. Now, he is especially concerned about history because history has been mixed up with a lot of other areas of social studies. It's more like reading comprehension than teaching history in the context it should be taught. And he is very, very distressed with a lot of the rules and regulations coming down in the state of New York in their Common Core teacher handbooks. Reading his essay is excellent. He goes into a lot of detail. He is a very, very learned man. If you want to see it, go to the engageny.org. These are in the papers that I have in the back, and I do encourage you to take these. Before I turn this back over to Grace, I do want to say that I am a retired teacher. I did retire so that I could pursue and try to get the education of what the Common Core is about out to the public. I could not do that as a teacher. I would have been fired. Besides, it takes a lot of time. I attended the legislative sessions 2 and 3 times a week, sat in on the education committees a lot, met a lot of legislators. It is moving. More and more legislators are getting educated. I handed my papers out. So many of them said, I don't know what Common Core is. I said, well, you need to learn. So right now, I am working with a lot of legislators trying to get us either to the point of passing legislation or defunding. But folks, it's going to come as a grassroots movement. There's no other way to say it. You've got to talk to your legislators. Robin Lundstrom and I have talked. I've talked to Curtis Coleman. I did it again. I talked to Asa Hutchison. By the way, both of them are very, very much against Common Core. So I'm going to turn this back over to Grace. Thank you.
The problem I have with Common Core, I mean, if it was just standards, I can homeschool my child, I can do different things to teach my child. To me, I feel like the Common Core is a total reform agenda, because when in our history have we changed standards, tests, everything? I mean, you look, everything says it's aligned with Common Core. The Girl Scouts are aligned with Common Core. So what is that reform agenda? Well, I think Secretary Arne Duncan said it best in his speech to United Nations, UNESCO, in 2010. He said, traditionally, the federal government in the United States has had a limited role in education policy. Our current administration has sought to fundamentally shift this role. Common Core, to me, violates 2 principles: that parents are the guardians of their children's education, and that good government comes from dividing power into many groups, not centralizing control. It also violates 3 laws. The General Education Provisions Act, which I will read to you, says this: no provision of any applicable program shall be construed to authorize any department, agency, officer, or employee of the United States to exercise any direction, supervision, or control over the curriculum, program of instruction, administration, or personnel of any educational institution, school or school system, or over the selection of library resources, textbooks, or other printed or published instructional materials by any educational institution or school system. It's also against the 10th Amendment. The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the federal government can be involved with education. This next slide is Melissa Harris Perry from MSNBC, and she had this to say about who our children belong to.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have, because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families, and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
I think that's a very dangerous mindset that we're going to there. And that's basically what we're seeing more and more, is that, well, the government knows what's better for your child than you, the parent, does. If you start looking at other countries like Germany, places like that, it's illegal to homeschool. So what are they saying? We, the government, knows better for your child than you. This next video is Arne Duncan, and we've already discussed that he is the Secretary of Education. And this was in a 2009 interview with Charlie Rose.
I think our schools should be open 12, 13, 14 hours a day. So it's not just lengthening.
So 8 to 8 or something like that?
Yes, and let me tell you what, not just lengthening obviously the school day, but a wide variety of after-school activities: drama, arts, sports, chess, debate, academic enrichment, programs for parents, GED, ESL, family literacy nights, potluck dinners. At home, we attached healthcare clinics to about 24 of our schools. Where schools truly become the centers of the community, great things happen. So I think we need the schools open much longer hours. And by the way, we don't have to do this all ourselves as educators. You can bring in great nonprofits, the YMCAs, the Boys and Girls Clubs, mentoring and tutoring groups to co-locate their services and better serve the community from the school. In every neighborhood in our country, you have schools. In every school, you have classrooms, you have computer labs, you have libraries, you have gyms, many have pools. Those buildings don't belong to you or I. They don't belong to the unions, they belong to the community. We have these great physical resources and we need to maximize
So keep them open 12 hours a day, 12 months a year.
Yes.
12 hours a day, 12 months a year.
And I would go to 6 or 7 days a week, not just Monday through Friday.
7 days a week.
Schools
So the school becomes a center of community life.
When the school becomes a center of community life, great things are going to happen for those families and great things are going to happen
And
to
then
those
tell me
children.
why that hasn't happened before. I mean, who has stood in the way of that happening before?
Well, I think this is, again, pushing innovation, pushing
Who
change.
stood in the way of it?
I don't know if there's one person that stood in the way.
I don't mean an individual, but has it been an organization, has it been an institution?
No,
has it
I
to
think
do
it's-
with resources? Has it to do with a mindset about education?
I think it's a lack. I think it's a lack of creativity and it's a lack of understanding what our children need. And again, this is where I think we've just been slow to react. If you go back 30 or 40 years ago,
So a change in mindset, a lack of understanding of what our children need. Do our children need to be in school that long every day? I'm sure that would change the character of our child if they had our child that long. And I don't think that, oh, tomorrow Arnie Duncan's going to mandate that children have to be in school 12 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week, 12 months a year. But what they do is they slowly make changes. I mean, currently he's using all of this federal money, our tax dollars, for daycares and to get children in there even earlier and get more of them so they can get our children even younger. So the biggest thing that I have with Common Core is that it's not just about the standards like they want to argue. And that's what we heard over and over, is these are just standards, it's not a big deal. There's a lot more involvement here. The National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, when I testified in front of the legislators, I said this is my biggest issue. We did not vote for these people. We are letting the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers make decisions for 45 states that we didn't even vote for them. Who did we vote for? Our legislators. They were bypassed. We, the parents, were bypassed. I mean, I didn't even know about this until this year, and it was, implemented in 2010. That is a huge problem. If we sit back and let these people just completely circumvent our constitutional process, we are setting a dangerous precedence that we are okay with that. I, for one, am not. I believe in our Constitution. So basically, how did this get started? You had this group Achieve, and they realized, these people, that they were going to have to present a facade of state involvement. And so that's why they went to the NGA and the CCSSO to get them involved so that they could say, hey, the states are the ones that want this. They got together and decided this, just not the people in the state. So one of these things is not like the other. This is how our government is supposed to work with these three branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. But this is how Common Core was implemented, completely bypassing this. Who did they involve? They involved private interest groups. They involved people like Bill Gates, who has funded tons of money to it. In 2013, April of this year, some members of Congress got together and they sent a letter to Arnie Duncan. And in this letter, they expressed their concern with the Department of Education's circumvention of Congress. I mean, that's another thing. Something that's decided on a national level should have gone through Congress, not the National Governors Association. They said the changes of the federal data collection and disbursement policies concerned them, and they also said that Common Core, they stated, is a one-size-fits-all policy that doesn't focus on the individual state's needs. Our federal Department of Education, like I said, has bypassed Congress and bypassed us. This is kind of how it came about, and with the stimulus bill, there's also other things. I've read all of these documents, the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, the Race to the Top. There's several different documents. And in all of these things, it all talks about better standards, higher standards. So in 2009, we know that's when the Race to the Top came out. It came out in November when our legislators weren't in session. So you had the governor and the State Board of Education that made this decision for our state. And they said, hey, money, we'll take money. How bad can common standards be, right? They were also offered, like you said, waivers from No Child Left Behind. They threatened to take away Title I funding. And what Title I funding is the funding for our poor schools. And we need that here in Arkansas. So, of course, we're going to be more likely to accept that, whereas states like Texas, where they have a little bit more money, maybe they can not. And funded by the NGA and the CCSO. So the federal government, who says we're not involved in this at all, their fingerprints are everywhere, all over it. They funded the National Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, with our tax dollars. A mom in Indiana called up and said, well, you know, we're funding these people. Can I go to the Council of Chief State School Officers that are writing the social studies? No. Can I review minutes? No. All of this is closed to the public. That's a big problem. Our legislators, when they have their sessions, that is open to the public. We can be privy to the information. The same thing with the State Board of Education. We can go to those meetings and be privy to what's being talked about, but not in these meetings. So, the state-led myth. So in 2009, we started working on the application. In 2010, of January, we submitted it. Then the standards came out in March. So we signed on to standards that we didn't even know what they read. So that was just the first draft. In June 2nd, the actual full set of standards were released. And then in July, our school board adopted them. Why did they adopt them so fast? Because there were 3 phases to Race to the Top. The first phase, we didn't receive any money. So the second phase was actually saying, yep, we're going to adopt the standards. We didn't receive any money from that, and we didn't even apply for the third phase. These standards are non-amendable due to a copyright. Who owns the copyright? The National Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers. It's not Arkansas that owns the copyright to these standards. They say that you can add up to 15%, but you cannot take anything away. So one of the things, like in Utah, they added cursive writing because that's not in the standards. They're not teaching our children to write in cursive anymore.
Well, they didn't do that before 2010.
Right. So we're going to talk real quickly, the 2 tests, SBAC and PARCC. We signed on to PARCC. And he, Dr. Endicott, made clear that this is a lot more expensive. When I would call up, before I even got started a lot, when I was doing my research, I called up the Department of Education and I asked, well, how much are these going to cost? They wouldn't tell me. All they kept saying to me was, well, we already budget more for testing than we spend. I'm like, I don't care what you budget. I'm asking, how much is this going to cost? Have we done the cost analysis? No, we didn't do a cost analysis. There's just a lot of, bad governance that went on with Common Core. Also, David Coleman, who's now on the college board, is going to align the SAT, the ACT, all of those with Common Core. This is a big one, the state longitudinal data system. When we had our hearing, they kept saying, we are not collecting these data points, we are not collecting these data points. And that probably is true, they aren't at this point, but I went through and read all of these documents. I read our application in 2009 that we got a grant for about $9 million for the state longitudinal data system. I called up Jim Boardman and I asked, are we collecting these? No, we're not. So when I went through and read it, it says in there that we will align, that we are working towards aligning to the National Education Data Model. So I went and I had somebody send me the National Education Data Model and go onto their website. It has over 400 data points. Also, they're changing things that it used to be that they would just get this on our school-age children. They can now get this from preschools and all the way till they're 20. They want to have a longer span of tracking our kids. And like he mentioned earlier, those 400 data points, some of them are also your religious affiliation, your voting, how your family votes, political affiliations, hobbies.
Their guns in the house.
Yeah, health information, all kinds of stuff. You would be shocked about these over 400 data points. My question is how will collecting this kind of information give our children a better education? And as we've seen with the NSA and the IRS and how they target specific groups, I think this really opens the door for discrimination. And how can they possibly keep this private? Well, I don't think the government's really concerned about privacy. As Dr. Endicott said, they changed FERPA. So they basically can share this information to other entities, whoever they deem appropriate, and they no longer need parental consent. It's a best practice only. So right now, EPIC is the Electronic Privacy Information Center. They have a lawsuit going on with the Department of Education Because the Department of Education had no real legal authority to go and change FERPA. That should have been done through Congress. I mean, that's what you keep seeing here, is that they keep bypassing the way that we are supposed to do things. Another thing that kept coming out is there is no, curriculum. You can still teach whatever you want. And that's one of the things when I called the principal when I was first starting to research this, I said, the State Department of Education says that y'all are the ones that choose the curriculum, so can we just use a different curriculum? This isn't working for my child, and I know lots of other parents that don't like the way the math's being taught. So can we go with something that's not aligned with Common Core, like Saxon homeschool math? He laughed at me. He said, Mrs. Lewis, if you had to take a test on the phone book, and it's going to be letters D through K, are you going to study letters A, B, and C? I said, no, sir. And he said, well, that's exactly how tests drive curriculum. So if we're going to have to test our kids on the lattice method and all these different methods to do math, that's how we're going to teach it. And that's how your child has to answer the question. This is Bill Gates talking about this very subject.
In terms of standards, the state-led Common Core State Standards Initiative is developing clear, rigorous standards that will match the best in the world. Last month, 46 governors and chief state school officers made a public commitment to embrace those standards. This is encouraging, but identifying common standards is just the starting point. We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. Secretary Arne Duncan recently announced that $350 million of the stimulus package will be used to create just these kinds of tests, next generation assessments aligned to the Common Core.
So basically what we see is the standards are kind of a Trojan horse for everything else. You've got the tests that the federal government directly funded. So those tests are going to, in turn, dictate the curriculum. So standards drive the tests, drive the curriculum, it's all together. And like Bill Gates just said, you can identifying common standards is just the starting point. We'll only know if this effort has succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned. So this is about curriculum. Bill Gates is a major player in Common Core, and Patrick's going to go into that more. But he's given over $150 million to it. He gave money to the PTA, and so of course, it's really hard to take people seriously when they're praising Common Core while they're being paid to do so. The last piece of this puzzle is the cost analysis. That's one of the things when I started calling around, I'm like, did we do a cost analysis? How much is this going to cost our state? No, there's never one done. But like he said, Pioneer Institute estimates it's going to be somewhere around $16 billion. So when I called up our local school, I said, how much, cost-wise are you seeing? He's like, well, I don't know for everything, but I can tell you this, Mrs. Lewis, just to have enough internet bandwidth for our little school is going to be $700 a month. He's like, multiply that by just the little schools around here. It's going to be an enormous amount. And so why do we have to have all that bandwidth of internet? It's for the PARCC test. And I mean, we as taxpayers should have had a say in this if we're the ones that are footing the bill for this. This was by a legislator, and he said this back in 1971 when he was addressing California legislation. But I thought it was very applicable to the Common Core reform agenda. He says they were as parts in a puzzle, analyzed by themselves. Each of these projects appeared to be either harmless or an expression of someone's dream. When linked together with other harmless programs, they were no longer formless, but could be seen as an entire package of plans outlining methods of implementation, organization structures, including flowcharts, computerization, use of behavioral profile, catalogs, and goals and objectives determination. Basically, that's what we see with Common Core. Whenever people want to say how great it is, they're just talking about the standards. They don't want to talk about all the other things that go along with Common Core. The standards are just one piece of the puzzle. So where did Common Core come from? Where's Common Core taking us? I think one of the places that we should look back to is Mark Tucker. He is an education reformer and has been on the scenes for decades. Back in 1992, he sent a letter to Hillary Clinton, and that letter was archived in the congressional record. and he showed his vision of a new form of government that would micromanage every step of the citizens' lives, using schooling as the facade for control. He says it lays out a plan to remold the entire American system into a seamless web that literally extends from cradle to grave, and is the same system for everyone, coordinated by a system of labor market boards at the local, state, and federal levels, where curriculum and job matching will be handled by counselors, accessing the integrated computer-based program. That is why they're wanting all this data mining. And the thing with the data mining, the federal government knows it's illegal for them to have one data system to collect on our kids. So what did they do? They went around to all the states and said, hey, we're going to give you grant money, millions and millions of dollars. Y'all just have to set up a data system that matches the same in all the states and collect the same information in all the states. So then essentially it's like one big data system. And so what will that lead us to? It could lead us basically to a system where they can decide where your child will go. They'll go on a career path or a college path. Recently, Tucker said that the United States will have to largely abandon the beloved emblem of American education, local control. When I read that, I thought, no. I think that we will not, and we will stand up for local control, and that's why I'm here today, because I will go around and I will speak to anyone or tell anyone that wants to learn more about the other side and the truth about Common Core. So this will all boil down to a managed system in which the core purpose of education is job preparation in order so that we can compete in a global economy. Pre-modern educational models made a clear distinction between the liberal arts and the servile arts. The two models are different in regard to the goals that they pursued. The goal of liberal arts was to cultivate a wise and virtuous man. The goal of servile arts was to cultivate skills for a given trade. To support oneself is only one part of a good education. In order for us to be truly free, we must have so much more. A broad liberal education is an imperative for the development of mature, free-thinking people who know who they are, why they are here, and understand their relationship to others and the world around them. C.S. Lewis described the purpose of servile schooling this way. It aims at making not a good man, but a good banker, a good electrician, or a good surgeon. There's nothing wrong with having good electricians or surgeons, but to pursue training at the expense of development of human character comes with a stern warning from Lewis. He writes, if education is beaten by training, civilization dies. The lesson of history is that civilization is a rarity attained with difficulty and easily lost. I think it is a universal desire that all parents want their children's education not to be just career ready or college ready, but more importantly to become mature thinkers who are highly motivated, self-disciplined, hardworking, creative, ambitious, happy individuals who know their own minds and who are prepared to thrive in any life path they choose. Common Core opponents, like I have said, are trying to make this about the standards. And we can argue all day long about the standards, and I feel that we would win, that they aren't the best. I mean, if they were truly, we wanted the best, we would have gone with Massachusetts standards, which are free, that we could have implemented, and they are better than Common Core standards. But we don't want to argue about the standards. We want to argue about something that goes much more deeper and is much more lasting. And it's our constitutional right to make these decisions for ourselves. If we, the people of Arkansas, don't take back control, we will lose it and it will never come back. We need to regain control of our education system. A lot of people ask me, what can I do? And I'd say the biggest thing is to educate yourself. Don't just listen to me. Don't just listen to Department of Education, but go out there, research. There's lots of good websites, Truth in American Education, or our website, Arkansas Against Common Core. And then once you have done the research and made the decision for yourself, call your legislators. Let them know if you are against Common Core. Talk to people. Post articles on Facebook or Twitter. Write letters to the editor. Go to your local school board meetings. Let them know your feelings and your state school board meetings. Let your voice be heard. Thank you.